Welcome to Taking It Up with Mark. Today we're going to be looking at smart objects, the very basics. So connecting to a backend system through a smart object, how we do that, what to look for in doing that, and just the basic process. This is very basic for K2, so it's very critical. I hope you learned something and I hope you enjoy. Thank you. So what are smart objects? Smart objects are our data connections in K2 that are really part of the underlying platform and used all over the place. So whenever in K2, which is almost always, we need to connect to an external system to store our data, to call a REST API, or anything like that, we're using smart objects to do that. So what a smart object, what we have, and this is actually from the K2 website or Nintex website, you can find this yourself. We'll have a bunch of provider systems such as database, web services, SharePoint, what other systems, and we'll consume these in our forms and workflows normally, or we can just call the smart object directly. So in between this layer of the providers and the consumers, we have our smart object layers. So this will be how we abstract that connection from other systems and use that within our K2 forms. So there's a couple steps into this to do this. Now, this will be a little bit overwhelming at first, but once we go through this architecture, I think it will be a little bit more simple. So we'll have a provider system, and in order to connect to that, we'll actually have a service broker. So that will actually be a bit of C# code in a DLL that will know how to connect to that provider or backend system. So we'll have that code. That code can usually be used generically anywhere, such as the example for SQL, and we'll put that connection information in there. That connection information is stored in a service instance. So that will actually be a row in the K2 database table in the background, and that will have, username and password and whatever information we need to connect to that backend service. And that will be partially defined by the code that we have there. Once we have that, we'll generate smart objects. So what we'll do is find from this back-end system some methods we can call, or define methods we can call with inputs and outputs, and map those to smart objects directly. So I think they have another example here. Let's go for the more simple example. If we're connecting to Microsoft SQL to a particular database and there's an employee table there, we may have the columns of ID, name, email, and we'll have some operations we can do with that: create, read, update. This will be defined in the service broker itself. From there, we'll create a service instance, so the connection information for that. Now I don't like this chart that much. Where we'll put in the specific database we're connecting to, and it will find these or discover these, and then from that we'll create a smart object. So I think that was a little bit confusing at first, so if we step through this process, I think it will be a little bit more clear. So I have here a smart objects tutorial database, and I'm going to create a new smart object. I also have a SQL server. This is just localhost here that I can connect to. So this will be external to K2, this database, and I'll use it in this example. So my server name, database will be K2 applications. So for example, if I wanted to connect to this example table, we'll just see what's in there first, if there's anything there. Probably not too much. Yep, we just have 4 columns, 1 test. If I want to connect to this, I can do that with a smart object, provided that we already have the service instance created. So we'll call this example SQL SMO. This will be an advanced smart object. We'll go over the difference between these two, and I'll click create. From here, I can find all the things that I connected to, where we have service instances for, where we provided connection information, and then from here create a smart object. So I had this DBO example table. There's 4 methods here. I can either add a method by going through the same tree that I did before. There's two places to create this. So let me just do this again. Oh, wrong database. For example, I'll do the list method first. I'll click next. Yes, this is a list method, so it will retrieve multiple rows of data. I have what the inputs and outputs for this method is. So I need to create these with SmartObject properties, which will usually be a one-to-one of what the external system is. And then I just have to click next here, so I could add several methods here, but we're not going to look at that now. Finish, and now I have a SmartObject with one method. I'm going to click finish here. I'm going to go to management where I can execute this. Go into the category system here. SmartObject tutorial, great, it's there. Didn't know if I had to refresh the screen. I'm going to wait a minute for this to load. Click on list, and I'm going to execute this method. I don't need any input properties here. The input properties that I do have defined were from where I go into this SmartObject, into methods, clicking on this particular method, and then here, input properties. So all those are there. If I add nothing for this particular list method, it will just give me everything, so it would filter by rows there. I don't need to keep this method name the same as it is there, but generally we do. So yeah, I have a SmartObject with a method. Let's add a create to this too, so we can see that working. We'll use a create. I'll just add something to it so we know that we can change that name. I'll use automap here, so I can create the properties, but it would create new properties for each, and I want to use the ones that I already created. Next, I'm only going to use one method here, so I'm going to click finish. Now I have these two methods, and the properties that were already created, I have these ones here. I'll click save. Let's see. How can I refresh this? If I click refresh here, yep, I see a second method. Create mark. Click execute. We'll try test 2. Let's see if this is going to give me any. I got an ID back, yes. So one of the return properties from the create method is the ID in the database. So now if I go to the database table itself, re-execute my query, I can see something there. Awesome. So that's how a SmartObject works. Just to note how I normally do this, and there's a little bit of a shortcut here. If I go remove all, and I do this for SQL tables all the time, I could drag this whole service object, we call it here, and then just click create all, finish. And then I have all the CRUD methods with list there. So I'd save that. And now if I refresh here, I see all the methods. So that just saves me some time. So that's great. We connected to this, we have a SmartObject, but that connection was already there for this. I just found that in the list. How did we direct K2 to actually find that connection? That's what we're going to do next. So I'm here in K2 management. I'm going to go close this categories, and I'm going to go to integration. So here we have our service instances. This, if we go back to this, is this thing right here, the service instance. I don't love these diagrams. Service instance here. So what we're doing is from the code to connect to Microsoft SQL, we're giving some connection information to like instantiate a class there. And that will be like saved in the database, that connection information. I don't know if that would technically be dehydrated and hydrated. I don't know if that's the right terminology for it, but you understand. So these are all the existing connections that we have already. So I'm just going to go for SQL, and we can see me connecting to different systems here. So this HR request, for example, we have first the display name, the service type, SQL. So what code we're using to actually connect. Service authentication, this is a standard part for connecting with a SmartObject. And then we have service keys. So these will be particular to each type of service. So this is defined in the code what they need to connect and what configuration information they need to connect to that backend system. So in the case of SQL, we have some database. Yes, the database name is required and the server is required. When we click OK, there's two type of service types we can go through here. So there's a static where there's just defined methods that come back to each other, come back here. So that's usually the case with custom code, you know, maybe for converting things to PDF or something like that. We would have that, or we have discovered. In this case, we have discovered. So it's going to go through the backend system and find all the tables and store procedures there, and then generate smart objects for us, or service objects that we can use to create smart objects there. So let's do that with a new one. So we'll call this display name SMO SQL example. Service type will be SQL. SQL Server service. Authentication mode, we have 5 different types here. Impersonate would be using the user's credentials to impersonate them. I rarely use that. OAuth, so this will use OAuth credentials, and there's a bit of additional configuration that has to be done for that. Service account, so this will be whatever the account the K2 service is running with, it will connect with that. Single sign-on, so the user's credentials would be saved in K2, and we would actually use them. And static, so this would be username, password. So you see username and password for the static, but I'll use service account in this case. Obviously, the service account needs to have access to the database. So we'll go through the mandatory flags here. This, yes, and we'll just connect to the same database. We can create a new one too. We'll see K2 applications. I don't know if this is going to give me some trouble for writing localhost instead of the name that we had. Oh, no trouble. Great. So now we have another connection saved, service instance saved in K2 that we could use to build smart objects. So if I go and create a new smart object, we'll call this example 2 SMO. And this is an advanced smart object. Then I can find this SMO SQL example, right? And I can find everything that's here in the table. All the tables here and all the stored procedures are also there. Now to note, if I create a new table, so let's use this script table as create to create a new table for the example other table. Man, I really need to get better with my names here, huh? Okay. So we'll create a new table here. And if I refresh, I see the new table, example other table. Now if I try to go and create a smart object with that, let's see if I can refresh this. I can't refresh that. We'll cancel out because it's a little bit unforgiving. And that. Example 2. SMO. SAMO. All right, advanced smart object. All right. I still don't see my database. So what we have to do when the schema changed for the database or whatever backend provider, this could be in anything, when something changes, we have to connect to that again. So what's actually happening when we do this, create a service instance, this one, we have this, we are going to that backend provider, if it's a discovered broker, and finding out the methods that are there, which is the case, and finding out the tables that are there, in case in SQL, and doing that. So we do that when it's a new connection, but we could also rerun that process by creating this or pressing this refresh service instance. So I did that. Now I should be able to find this table. Unfortunately, this is really not forgiving, and I have to go out and in again. So I'll do that. Example 2. Advanced Smart Object. And now when I go to create, I see here my service instances. And now my tables, I see this there. Example other table. So if I looked at the other ones I did for this, like in K2 applications, I haven't refreshed that service instance yet. So I don't yet see that table. That discovery process hasn't been done for that service instance. Oops, just hit my knee on my desk. Okay, so let's go a layer or two deeper here. Although I think that was pretty much the basics. If you understood everything there, very good. So we have a bunch of service types here. This is actually the code that is used to connect to this backend providers. And this is going to be a lot of, just for your information here. These are all C# assemblies that are stored within the K2 folder. So if I go to my K2 Black Pearl folder, in my case, program files 86, K2 Black Pearl, it might be just K2 sometimes. All of these DLLs are actually saved here in the service broker. So if you're creating a custom service broker, which I've actually done in another video, maybe I'll link that in the screen here. I haven't done that before. You first put it in here, you restart the K2 service, and then it will show up in this service types list. So that's pretty cool. Actually, did I say that? Let's see. Well, we actually have to register the service type. So we would first throw the DLL in that folder, and then from there we would create new. Yeah, and from here we could see all the DLLs, I think whatever class it's showing here or whatever like that. There we would find our new DLL, which was normally on the top. You can see where I have these custom ones there. And we would click OK, and then we would have a new option there. So we would have a new service type that would connect to a different provider system or whatever provider system we want, or it could be just straight up C# code that we want. Sometimes we did that for easier methods. Then we would create the service instance. So we would give whatever connection information we need. Just to take a look at something different, here is where I connected to a REST service. And if I edit this service instance, very important. I have the standard connect information, so what type of service I'm using, the display name, the authentication mode, and for this I need a descriptor location for the REST files, what the methods actually look like. So this is something specific to REST. For other web services, I would just need a particular URL. So let's go add another service instance. If I go to another service type, like, let's see, endpoints WCF, we have here the service endpoint URL and a metadata URL, so it can get generate service objects from that. Now, I did this a little bit backwards, but there is also the option, if you don't have something to connect to, you can connect and store things in the K2 database, and that's by using just SmartBox SmartObjects. So we kind of have two names for this. Sometimes we call it a basic SMO, basic SmartBox, not advanced SMO. So in this case, when we create it, the whole process of the service type is already selected for you, and the service instance is already selected to you. So that all happened in the background. So here we just create some properties, mark, test, title. It's not my kid screaming in the background if you hear that. And then here, if we save this, this will actually create a database in the K2 database, in the K2 database itself, which we don't like because it's a little bit less control there, but in the K2 database. So, for example, if I finish this, and if I run this, go back to my categories here, refresh, see my basic smart object. I can see that it gave me 4 methods here, and I can use that. So this would only be for data we want saved there. We could use this in other systems, but obviously this doesn't connect to SharePoint. This doesn't do anything like that. For those, SharePoint's a little bit different, but we need service instances created and to create an advanced object there. So to show this too, while this is basic, this is just watered down. If we change the properties to advanced, we could actually see what's actually going on in the background. And we see that there's a method bindings here and there's a service for it. So this does work the same. So let's see. I think that's pretty much all I want to cover for this. We will, we could go over some more advanced SmartObject functions later as needed. We don't use those as often, but thanks for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, whatever, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.